Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, and a good Monday morning to you. Thanks for listening, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast afterwards. Let's dive right on in. We had Senator Raphael Warnock with Kristen Welker yesterday on Meet the Press. Let's take a listen to that interview.
Well, you just heard what former President Trump had to say about President Biden, an indication that this campaign is already shaping up to be a brutal one. How should President Biden respond to those types of attacks, Senator?
Here, real quick, let me give you a clip from Donald Trump at his campaign stop in Rome, Georgia over the weekend where he mocked President Joe Biden for having a stutter.
2 nights ago, we all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant of a State of the Union address. Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together. Everything Joe Biden touches turns everything.
Well, sadly, if I were to ask you, are you surprised? Is anybody surprised by what we heard coming out of the mouth of the former president? The answer is no. This is who Donald Trump is. And I have to tell you, as the father of a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, it's terrible when you have to bleep the words from a former president. But Joe Biden is tried, tested, and true. He's seen this nonsense before. He saw it and experienced it the other night with the other side heckling in the middle of the president's speech. And he pressed on because he's not focused on himself. Unlike his challenger, he's not focused on what this election means for him as Donald Trump runs from the jailhouse. He's focused on what this election means for the American people, the people of Georgia, and he spoke with power the other night about the future.
That's a pretty poignant statement, too, especially when you consider now that the Hunter Biden investigation on the right has come up absolutely empty. You can now posit one candidate who is running to keep himself out of jail versus the other candidate, the president, who is running to keep America on track.
Well, let's talk about your home state now, Georgia. President Biden won it narrowly in 2020 by fewer than 12,000 votes. Now polls show that he's actually trailing former President Trump. You're not going to be on the ballot this year. What do you say to Democrats who say they are afraid that Georgia is out of reach?
I say soldier on. As someone who has had his name on the ballot in Georgia 5 times in 3 years, I know a little bit about what it means to run in Georgia. And the road to the White House leads straight through Georgia. He won by 12,000 votes or less than 12,000 votes. Votes, by the way, the ex-president tried to steal. But he's president of the United States, and Georgia's going to show up in a strong way for Joe Biden.
Let me ask you about this twist we learned about this week. No Labels is reportedly considering Georgia's former Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan to potentially lead a unity ticket. How could that impact the results of Georgia? Could that make it all but nearly impossible for Joe Biden to win?
Listen, it's still relatively early in the campaign season. And I think that the more we hear from the Donald Trump that we just heard from a little while ago, the clearer it's going to be to people that at the end of the day, this is a binary choice. And the question is, do you want the America of January 5th that sent its first black senator from Georgia, its first Jewish senator from Georgia to the United States Senate? Or do you want the America of January 6th, pushed forward by a president who continues to advance the big lie about the election? And behind that lie is the lie that this new multiracial democracy does not get to determine the future of the country. He's looking backward. Joe Biden is looking forward. And I think at the end of the day, the people of Georgia will see that choice, that binary choice, very clearly. And they'll do the right thing for Joe Biden as they did for me.
But, Senator, if No Labels were to run a unity ticket, one that included Jeff Duncan, could that not spoil the race for Joe Biden? You don't.
I don't understand where she's going with this. Jeff Duncan is a Republican. He's a Republican. If he's going to spoil the race for anybody in states like Georgia, why wouldn't it hurt Donald Trump more? Jeff Duncan is a Republican. According to the AJC's Greg Bluestein, who reported on this a couple days ago when speaking about the potential No Labels bid, Jeff Duncan quickly positioned himself as an ally to Governor Brian Kemp, one of the first high-profile officials to endorse Senator Kelly Loeffler. Before he became a vocal critic of Trump, he was seen as a potential contender for the U.S. Senate or other higher office. Now, Bluestein does pivot to say the extent of Duncan's national name recognition is unclear, though. He's tried to build a broader profile as a CNN commentator, because, that's where the right-wingers go to get their news, and a contributing columnist to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution after leaving office in 2023. Still, he could have a bigger impact on the electorate in Georgia, where he won nearly 2 million votes in 2018. This is not exactly a ringing endorsement from the liberal side of the No Labels movement either. Former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, one of the leaders of the No Labels movement, said on the Julie Mason show that Duncan was an intriguing prospect, saying, "I can't confirm or deny, but I admire him a lot because he has the guts to stand up. He's a conservative Republican." Yes, he is. But he stood up to Trump, particularly after the 2020 election. All right, so let's get back to Welker, who just wants to paint this as if this is somehow going to hurt Biden more. That's going to hurt Trump. I just don't understand I don't understand the perspective she's coming with there.
Do you?
Listen, I think that the people of Georgia are at the end of the day asking who's in the fight for them. And as I sat the other night and listened to the president's speech, I'll tell you, I said to my colleagues, I don't know if that was Joe Biden or Joe Lewis, because the man came out fighting and he never let up, and he's not going to let up between now and November. I think the people of Georgia will recognize that when it came time to forgive the student debt of people who've just been mired in debt, young people who have had a mortgage just trying to deal with their future, that Joe Biden, with one hand behind his back, with the Republicans suing him,
literally,
did $138 billion of student debt relief. That's closing the racial wealth gap. The man's got receipts, and the people of Georgia will show up for him in November.
Senator, let me ask you about this. Neither President Biden nor Vice President Harris have committed to President Biden debating Mr. Trump. Do you think the American people deserve to see these two candidates debate in a general election?
No, we don't. Haven't we suffered enough? I mean, seriously, this is nothing to do with Biden's ability to debate, and everything to do with his opponent. What do parents of toddlers tell you? You don't debate a toddler. You don't. You just can't argue with them. You have to lay down the law. It's either yes or no, and sometimes you just have to say no. Donald Trump is, how do I put this? He's incapable of having substantive dialogue. A lot of his followers are as well. It's sometimes when you're at that uncomfortable family dinner and you've got that crazy uncle who just spews a bunch of nonsense that he heard on talk radio, Fox News. Do you want to get through dinner, or do you want to stop everything and have a substantive debate only for, crazy uncle to just pitch a fit? And we've seen this time and time again. Donald Trump isn't capable of having decorum at a debate. To me, it's a trap. I don't blame the Biden-Harris administration for not wanting to touch a debate schedule in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Welker continues on, though.
Oh, listen, I think the debate is already underway. And again, this is a binary choice.
But, Senator, should they formally debate? You know what I'm asking, Senator.
No.
Should there be a formal debate between President Biden and former President Trump?
I support debates, but I'm not a part of the president's campaign. I represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate, and I think we're going to hear a fierce argument in the months ahead, and the contrast couldn't be clearer.
See, if I'm Raphael Warnock, the first thing I say is, you're asking about a formal debate? Have you seen that man do anything formally? That almost literally goes to my point. You cannot have a formal debate with someone who is completely lacking in decorum and formality.
Let's talk about the war in the Middle East now. In his State of the Union address, President Biden announced that the U.S. is building a port to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. It could take as long as 60 days. Doctors Without Borders called it, quote, a glaring distraction from the real problem: Israel's indiscriminate and disproportionate military campaign and punishing siege. Is sending more aid enough, Senator, when innocent civilians are being killed and are dying every day?
Listen, we have got to find our way quickly to the path that leads to peace. That's why the other night on the floor of the United States Senate, I pushed for a ceasefire. I know the president is working hard to get to a ceasefire. Mr. Netanyahu has got to recognize that we've already seen the deaths of some 30,000 Palestinians, many of them innocent women, men, and children. You know, I think about this not just as a senator, and even not just as a pastor, but as a father. Last night, as I was putting my own children to bed and dealing with my son as he was dealing with an incessant cough, I thought about parents in Gaza. It's a terrible thing as a parent when your kid is sick. And here I was just dealing with a cold, and I thought about the fact that there are parents in Gaza right now who are dealing with the ordinary challenges that children deal with, who have seen amputations of children without anesthesia. There are children who are wounded with no living weapons, with no living relatives. And so we've got to find our way to peace quickly.
Incidentally, I wanted to pause right here just to tell you that the second half of the show, I'm going to give you Senator Warnock's floor speech calling for a negotiated ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. So stand by for that. Now, while Kirsten Welker had Senator Warnock on, she wanted to ask about the Fani Willis situation. So let's eavesdrop on that real quick.
Senator, finally, let me just ask you about another developing story in your state. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis could be thrown off of Donald Trump's 2020 election interference case in Georgia after admitting that she had that personal relationship with the lead prosecutor, though she argues there was no impropriety. Do you think that relationship undercuts the integrity of the case, and should she step down?
Listen, we are watching our judicial process play out. And I know that there are folks, unfortunately, in the state of Georgia, politicians, who are trying to put their hand on the scale. I'm not going to pile on. I'm not going to add to that. I will watch this process play out, and we will see where the chips fall. But at the end of the day, here's what Donald Trump deserves. He deserves to have a fair trial before a jury of his peers. And in this case, as voters of Georgia, and we need to see that play out.
And given that, do you think that the optics have become so complicated around this that Fani Willis should step down for the better good of the case that you just talked about?
It's too late for that.
Well, listen, I think this case is being played out before a judge, and that judge will have to make a decision not based on optics, but based on the law. And that's the wonderful thing about America. We believe that no one is above the law, including Donald Trump.
All right. Senator Raphael Warnock, thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday. We really appreciate it.
Meet the Press then went to break and came back with South Carolina's hissing possum senator. That would be Senator Lindsey Graham. Quite the contrast there. This is the Monday Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. So, as we were watching the response to the State of the Union address, Alabama Senator Katie Britt, we all knew that she was going to be featured as the cold open for Saturday Night Live within minutes of her performance, right? And sure enough, someone, I guess Colin Jost, hit up Scarlett Johansson. Hey, honey, do you mind coming into work? And sure enough, this was the cold open.
Good evening, America. My name is Katie Britt, and I have the honor of serving the great people of Alabama. But tonight, I'll be auditioning for the part of Scary Mom. And I'll be performing an original monologue called This Country is Hell. You see, I'm not just a senator. I'm a wife, a mother, and the craziest bitch in the Target parking lot.
But you know what? That wasn't the worst of it for Katie Britt.
First and foremost, I'm a mom. And like any mom, I'm going to do a pivot out of nowhere into a shockingly violent story about sex trafficking. And rest assured, every detail about it is real, except the year, where it took place, and who was president when it happened.
Yeah, that part. Let's get to this. Jonathan Katz is a journalist and now famous on TikTok after he did some digging on an anecdote that Katie Britt gave in her State of the Union response.
The part that was the weirdest for me, the part that was the most off, was this.
When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12.
So I immediately had questions. Who was this woman? How did she meet her? How did she get her to tell her this story? Also, she seems to be describing something that had happened over the process of years. She said that it started when this woman was 12, and she says that she's a woman now, so it seems that some time has passed. How much of this happened on the border? What country did it happen in? Did it happen before Joe Biden was president? Senator Britt, right after that, stated pretty directly what side of the border it happened on, or at least she implies it very strongly.
And we wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America.
All right, so there's the answer. It happened in the United States. Or did it? So I looked a little bit to see if I could figure out what Senator Britt was talking about here. And I found it pretty easily. Senator Britt has told the story over and over and over again since going on this trip. So all I had to do was look for details of the trip, see if there was any information about who she talked to, and if there was any more information about this case there. And I think I found it pretty easily. So in January 2023, Senator Britt, who had just become the junior senator from Alabama, traveled to southern Texas to the Del Rio district near the border of Mexico with two other Republican senators, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee and Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi. And Senator Blackburn had all of the information about it on her website, her senatorial website. During this trip, among other scheduled visits, the senators had what they described as a round table, although you can see it's not a round table, it's a long table on which they are sitting on one side of it. It's a press conference. They were there with a Fox News contributor, Sarah Carter, who often does sort of the xenophobic anti-immigration coverage, as well as a Mexican congresswoman who's become an anti-human trafficking activist, as well as this woman, who the senators identify as Carla Jacinto Romero. All I had to do was click on Carla Jacinto Romero's name, that hyperlink, on Senator Blackburn's page, and it took me to this. This is Carla Jacinto Romero's testimony to Congress from 2015 about her experiences in Mexico. And if you scroll down, you see it took place between 2004 and 2008. Now, I don't know what they put in the textbooks in Alabama these days, but Joe Biden wasn't the president of the United States in 2004 or 2008. He wasn't even the vice president of the United States. That wouldn't happen until 2009. In 2004 to 2008, the president of the United States was George W. Bush. The vice president was Dick Cheney. And none of that really matters here because these events didn't happen in the United States. These crimes didn't take place in the United States or even near the border. They took place in Mexico, in Guadalajara, in Mexico City, and other parts of Mexico. And yet this senator has gone around repeatedly for the past year and change, telling the story over and over again as if this woman had confided something in her and as if she was describing actions that had taken place on or even near the U.S.-Mexico border during Joe Biden's presidency. I don't even know what to say except that is just fundamentally dishonest. It goes beyond misleading. She said it in the piece of the video that you saw before. She says, we wouldn't accept these things if they happened in a third world country. It didn't happen in the United States. It's not an example of something that happened recently, or it's not even an example of something that happened on the border, then there's certainly not something that happened under Joe Biden. So why would she share that story? It seems very clear to me that what she's trying to do is she's trying to create an association in people's minds between Joe Biden, the border, Mexicans, Latin, people of Latin descent, something like that, and sexual violence. That's what she's going for. Yep. And she's doing it on the basis of what you can only say is just an out-and-out lie. After I watched this, I looked up her spokesperson, which is never easy to find these days, but I found an email address for him. I sent him an email. I asked him for comment, if he could explain what the senator meant, if there was some other incident that she was talking about that I hadn't found. They haven't gotten back to me. If they do, I will update then. But for now, it just looks like she just got on national television and lied about something really horrific and really important, and for her own personal and her party's political gain.
Which is definitely on brand when a bipartisan immigration deal is negotiated in the Senate and then quashed in the House at the behest of the candidate for the presidency from that party as well.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So earlier in the show, we heard from Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock on Meet the Press, and Kristen Welker asked him a good deal about the president and his position on the Hamas-Israel fight. And Senator Warnock has come out now in full support of a ceasefire, a negotiated ceasefire, but a ceasefire nonetheless. He took to the floor of the U.S. Senate last week to give an impassioned speech on that. Let's listen to that as much as we can.
Madam President, I rise tonight in anguish and in sorrow over the heinous and horrific attack by Hamas on the people of Israel on October 7th, and also in response to the catastrophic humanitarian nightmare unfolding on the ground in Gaza right now, leaving over 100 Israeli hostages and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians suffering, tens of thousands, including many women and children, already dead, with no end in sight. And while much can be said about the geopolitics, perhaps because I am a pastor, I see first and foremost the people. On all sides of this awful and ugly, deadly conflict, I see the children of God. All of us are children of God. And I especially see the children. The haunting and penetrating witness of that ancient woman of the Jewish scriptures speaks to me in this moment. A voice is heard in Ramah, the sound of mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children, and she refuses to be comforted, for they are no more. I hear Jewish mothers and fathers and Palestinian mothers and fathers weeping for their children, and the question is, what would we do if we truly believe that all of the children are truly our children? What would each side do if they could look into the eyes of the children on the other side and see in those children's eyes what they see when they look into the eyes of their own?
Right.
When we come to see that the safety of other people's children is inextricably connected to the safety of our own, we will do so much more to ensure that all children are safe. When we come to see that the health of other people's children is inexorably related to the health of our own, we will do so much more to ensure that every child can eat. When we come to see that the future of all children is tied to our children's future, we will ensure that every child can learn, play, imagine, and grow. We will hasten toward that path that leads to peace. And in that spirit, I rise tonight to explain why I think we have reached an inflection point in this conflict, one that demands all involved redouble our efforts to get a ceasefire and ultimately a just and sustainable peace. Now, I do not mean to suggest that any of this is simple. Indeed, if it were simple, it would have been resolved a long time ago. The issues in the Middle East are complicated. They are age-old and seemingly intractable. We live in a dangerous world, rife with conflict and replete with enemies who do not want to see peace. October 7th was a tragic reminder. Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization that has the total destruction of Israel etched in its charter documents and ensconced in its mission, perpetrated the most devastating attack we've seen on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Some 787 civilians were killed, more than 1,100 if you count security personnel. Unbridled brutality and cruelty visited upon seniors and women and children. Among those taken as hostages were young people simply enjoying a concert. Rape and sexual assault used as a weapon of war. Such depraved and immoral acts are rightly condemned by all who believe in human dignity and freedom. Our ally Israel lives in a dangerous neighborhood, and it has a right to defend itself. That is why I was proud to support the National Security Supplemental in the Senate, and it needs to pass in the House. It provides $5.2 billion for missile defenses like the Iron Dome. But it also provides $9 billion in humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza and in other places. Moreover, it supplies urgently needed aid to Ukraine, a sovereign democratic state viciously attacked by Putin's Russia. We stand with Ukraine. Their vital national security interests are tied to our own. Putin, the old KGB agent with fond memories of the old Soviet Union, will not stop his murderous march with Ukraine. He will threaten other NATO allies. And because of NATO's Article 5 protection, which states an attack on one is an attack on all, that could well draw us in. And so last week I participated in the Munich Security Conference. And while we rightly urge our allies to put more skin in the game, as they should, to increase their own commitment to their own security, and to be sure some of them are stepping up, the truth is there is no replacement for American leadership in the world. We, alongside our allies, must stand with Ukraine. In a broken and dangerous world like ours, evil has to be constrained, tyranny rejected, sometimes by force. And I'd rather send military support to Ukrainian soldiers in their valiant defense of their homeland and of Europe today than send American soldiers to that fight tomorrow. It is not only the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do for our own national security interests.
That part.
But ultimately, if we are speaking of Ukraine or Israel, ultimately the aim must always be peace, a sustainable peace, a just peace. The kind of peace that must be rigorously pursued with both a tough mind and a tender heart. I pray for peace for the people of Ukraine, for the suffering people of Sudan, for Israeli children and Palestinian children, they are all children of God. I think of the story of 13-year-old Ariel Zohar, an Israeli teenager who lost both of his parents and his two older sisters when Hamas attacked Kibbutz Nahal Oz, just 2 months before his bar mitzvah. Ariel just happened to be out for a run, and he sought shelter with a kibbutz security guard. And that's the only reason young Ariel survived. May God bless the memory of Ariel's family and the security guard who also died at the hands of Hamas. He survived, but a 13-year-old child must now live with this trauma. It is a trauma that I know Jewish people in Georgia and around the world are living every day. And the tragic irony is that in the wake of October 7th, anti-Semitism has actually gone up. And all of this is now witnessed through the prism of a people who have never truly felt safe in the world. People who carry the burden of history, centuries of it, in their bones. I got a sense of it in recent weeks as I sat with the families of hostages being held by Hamas. I sat with those families who were stunned by the nightmare of their reality. People who have no idea when or how their family members might return. I recall meeting with one father who was lamenting what had happened on October 7th to his daughter and his son-in-law when they were attacked by Hamas. Beyond his grief, here's what he wanted to know. He wanted to know, does anybody other than us understand? Do they get it? Can they see what we see, hear what we hear? Feel what we feel. And as he said that, with such pain and pathos in his voice, he was speaking about his own family. But he just as well could have been speaking for the family of 13-year-old Donya Abu Mohsen, a Palestinian girl. Who lost her parents and two brothers in an Israeli missile strike in South Gaza and had to have her leg amputated. And while she was recovering in the hospital, she was tragically killed by another Israeli airstrike while in the hospital. May God bless the memory of Donya and her family. Donya is one of more than 12,000 children and tens of thousands of defenseless Palestinians who reportedly have been killed since Israel has been prosecuting its war against Hamas. There's an acronym used in Gaza. WCNSF, Wounded Child with No Surviving Family. And according to media reports, an estimated 17,000 Palestinian children fall under that category. Wounded child with no surviving family. And another 2 million Palestinians have been displaced by the effort to rid the world of Hamas. When I meet with my Palestinian and Muslim constituents in Georgia, Madam President, members of our human family, I also hear them wondering, Does anybody other than us understand?
We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and pick up on this speech right where we left off. Sorry, got to take care of some business here on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. You are listening to The Ron Show. Reverend Warnock giving a passion speech for a ceasefire last week on the Senate floor. Follow The Ron Show on social media, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, the X platform, Twitter, at Ron Show ATL. Last week, Senator Raphael Warnock, a reverend of course as well, gave an impassioned plea for a negotiated ceasefire on the Senate floor. We want to get back to that and try and get you as much of that as is possible in the time allowed on the remainder of this show.
Do they see what we see? Do they hear what we hear? Can they feel what we feel? Does anybody care? The staggering loss of Palestinian lives should deeply trouble all of us. Mm-hmm. But equally concerning is the serious humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding in Gaza before our very eyes. Earlier this week, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said during a briefing that about 1/4 of the population in Gaza, 576,000 people are, quote, one step away from famine and facing a, quote, grave situation. Diseases like hepatitis A and digestive illnesses are spreading rapidly in overcrowded makeshift camps. And this is made worse by a lack of access to clean water or sanitation systems. Families right now are huddled in makeshift tents and other shelters, exposed to the winter elements, with everything they can carry on their backs. The medical system in Gaza has collapsed, with only a handful of hospitals still partially functioning. On average, reportedly, more than 10 children have lost one or both of their legs every day since October 7th, with many of those amputations performed without anesthesia. Pregnant women in Gaza have experienced a 300% increase in miscarriages. And most recently, the Netanyahu administration has once again ordered displaced Palestinians, women, children, seniors, regular civilians already pushed out of their homes by war to evacuate territory they were told would be safe after fleeing previous offensives by the IDF in northern Gaza. If Mr. Netanyahu advances military operations into Rafah, the question is, where are these people supposed to go? What will be the human consequences? World-class epidemiologists tell us that with an escalation of the war into Rafah, as many as 85,000 Palestinians could die from injuries and disease over the next 6 months. 85,000 on top of the already mounting death toll. I submit that such a move would be unconscionable and morally indefensible. Mm-hmm. But what do we do about Hamas, a terrorist organization bent on Israel's destruction? Let me be clear. Israel would be better off, the Palestinian people would be better off, the world would be better off without Hamas.
It's a given.
But Hamas is more than a terrorist organization. It is an ideology. It is a mindset. It is a way of thinking that sits in a place deeper than the tunnels beneath Gaza. And if the legacy of Hamas's violence on October 7th becomes continuing and escalating indiscriminate violence in turn, then the destructive ideology of Hamas will have won the day.
That's right, exactly.
We must not let them win. We must be careful not to create through indiscriminate killing that which we seek to destroy. We must find a more excellent way. With a tough mind and a tender heart, we must find that way that leads to peace. We are at an inflection point, a place where two ways meet, and time is running out. I call upon Israel and Hamas to come to a negotiated ceasefire with the immediate release of hostages and opening of humanitarian corridors so that food, medicine, water, and other supplies can be delivered to the people of Gaza with the fierce urgency that the situation demands. I am heartened by the quiet but steady work of the Biden administration and our regional partners in this effort, and I urge that it continue in earnest. Furthermore, we must reaffirm our unwavering commitment to a two-state solution. The people of Israel deserve to live in peace and security alongside their neighbors. I agree with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said that Israel's right to exist as a state in security is incontestable. The whole world, he said, must see that Israel must exist and has the right to exist. The dignity of self-determination is among the values he was seeking to uphold. Israelis deserve it, so do Palestinians. Two peoples, two states, living alongside one another in freedom and in peace. That must remain our North Star. And if we would be true to our values, we must call to task any politician who would reject that right to self-determination, especially if that rejection comes while at the same time one is engaged in massive and indiscriminate bombing of the very same people.
Right.
From the ugly and dangerous specter of it all, the world cannot and must not turn away. With the Muslim holy day of Ramadan around the corner and the Jewish Passover shortly thereafter, we are at an inflection point. A place where two traumatized peoples meet. As a black man who stands in Dr. King's pulpit, I know a little something about trauma. I know that while our trauma informs us, it must never define us. We are more than what has happened to us. We have within our capacity the strength to write a new story. We must pursue peace, seek justice, embrace mercy, and struggle for human dignity with all of our might. The children on each side and all of our children are counting on us to do no less. I wonder what we would actually do if we truly believe that all of the children are our children. As a parent with small children, I wonder what would each side do if they could look into the eyes of the children on the other side and see in those children's eyes what they see when they look into the eyes of their own. Perhaps this is what the prophet Isaiah was getting at when he put forth this extraordinary vision, and I lifted up. The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together. And a little child shall lead them. Honestly, I never quite understood what Isaiah meant. It seems too idyllic and otherworldly, even for the preacher. But perhaps the prophet is saying something much more practical than we think. To be sure, peacemaking is not easy work at all by any stretch of the imagination. But perhaps when we allow our children and our love for our children, our concern for their future, and our children's inextricable connection to all other children to lead us, when we allow the children to lead us, we will find ourselves on the path that leads to peace. So tonight, I pray for a world where Israeli mothers and fathers and Palestinian mothers and fathers can put their children to bed in peace, say their bedtime prayers, and awaken to a world where they are finally safe. Madam President, I yield the floor.
That is a listen back to Senator Raphael Warnock's floor speech last Wednesday in the U.S. Senate. It's going to do it for the Ron Show show notes. We've got them for you at ronshowatl.com. Back here tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, and anytime afterwards, wherever you podcast. We do the replays 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks for listening. See you again.